My name is Ella. Ever since I was a little girl, I dreamed of a fairy tale wedding. Delicate lace, fragrant roses, and the tinkling laughter of friends and family filling the air. But dreams are just that, ethereal visions that dissolve upon contact with reality. My reality took the form of my mother-in-law, Doris. The day started off so beautifully. The sky was clear, with not a cloud in sight. The venue was set. The chairs, the aisle, and the archway were perfect. My bridesmaids fluttered around me, adding the final touches to my gown and makeup. I looked in the mirror and couldn't believe it. I was getting married. Mark, my soon-to-be husband, looked dashing in his tuxedo. When he slipped the engagement ring onto my finger a year ago, it felt like the world stopped spinning just for us. I believed we were meant to be. But love can sometimes be a one-way mirror. It shows you what you want to see, not what you need to see. As I made my way down the aisle, my eyes met Mark's, and for a second, everything seemed perfect. That was until I saw Doris, Mark's mother, glaring at me from the front row. She had the kind of smile that was more like a predator revealing its fangs than a gesture of goodwill. After the ceremony, during the reception, Doris walked over to where I was standing. She looked me up and down as if inspecting a piece of furniture she was considering tossing out. My, you do look interesting, she said, examining my wedding gown. Thank you, Doris, I replied, trying to maintain my composure. It's one of the most special days of my life. Special? She scoffed. Honey, you're marrying into our family. The special days are yet to come. Before I could say anything, Mark walked over. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would say something to defend me. Instead, he wrapped his arm around his mother and led her away, muttering something about getting her a glass of champagne. Your mom has quite the opinions, I told Mark when we found a moment alone. She's just being protective, he replied dismissively. Don't let her get to you. I just wish you'd stand up for me, I said, my eyes pleading. He looked at me with a puzzled expression. She's my mom, Ella. She's just getting used to the idea of me being married. Give her time. I nodded, but deep inside I felt a sinking feeling. This was not the unconditionally supportive Mark I fell in love with. This Mark seemed like a stranger, a man caught between the woman he was supposed to love and the woman he could never confront. As we posed for photographs, I pasted a smile on my face, but my heart was heavy. That day, a cloud hovered over me, invisible to everyone else but oppressively real to me. And though my wedding was filled with the scent of blooming roses and the sounds of celebration, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that this was merely the calm before the storm. Mark and I cut the cake, shared our first dance, and listened to toasts praising our perfect love. But I knew better. Hidden behind the facade of this blissful event was the omen of the trials that awaited me. I tried to push those thoughts away, clinging to the remnants of the dream that was supposed to be my perfect day. But dreams end, and reality sets in. And as I stood there, a newlywed on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had just signed up for a role in a play where the script was nothing like I had expected. Little did I know, my real trials were yet to begin. The honeymoon phase, they call it. Those initial months of marriage when everything seems tinted with the golden hue of romantic bliss. Mark and I settled into my house, and we tried to live like a normal, happy couple. We cooked dinners together, snuggled up on the couch watching movies, and even talked about maybe having kids in a year or two. I had a high-paying job at a tech company, and Mark was building his career as a graphic designer. Though his income was modest, it didn't matter. We were comfortable in making plans for a future together. That was until the day she arrived, the queen of disruption, Doris. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon. Mark and I were sipping coffee in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. As I opened the door, my eyes met with a mountain of luggage on the porch. Confused, I looked up and saw Doris standing there like she owned the place. "Ella, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with fox sweetness. "Is Mark home?" Yes, he's in the kitchen," I replied, gesturing for her to come in, though I had a sinking feeling I would regret it. Mark's face lit up when he saw his mother, but the smile faded as soon as he saw the bags. "Mom, what's all this?" he asked, his eyes filled with apprehension. "I've been evicted. These damn landlords, always looking for a quick buck, so I'll be staying here," she declared, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Staying here? For how long?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. "Oh, just until I get back on my feet," she replied, already making herself comfortable and eyeing the room as if considering a remodeling. I glanced at Mark, waiting for him to say something, anything that would draw a line. Establish boundaries. Instead, he sighed and mumbled, "Sure, Mom. We'll make it work. Isn't that lovely?" "A family reunion," Doris said, beaming triumphantly. After Doris moved in, our house transformed almost overnight. The peaceful sanctuary Mark and I had begun building was now invaded by a force that was neither peaceful nor respectful of our sanctuary. "We need to talk," I told Mark later that night, pulling him aside into our bedroom. "About what?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "Your mother can't just move in without discussing it with both of us. This is our home, Mark, not a halfway house. She has nowhere else to go. Ella, what do you want me to do? Throw her out on the street?" "No, but a conversation would have been nice. A little heads up so we could prepare for this family reunion, as she calls it," I retorted, emphasizing the last two words with a sarcastic air. "Look, it's just temporary. Let's just deal with it until she finds another place," he said, avoiding eye contact. I sighed deeply. The man I married, the man who vowed to love and honor me, was nowhere to be found. In his place was this submissive son, reluctant to stand up to his mother even at the expense of his wife's happiness. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Mark snored softly beside me, but sleep was far from my reach. I couldn't help but wonder, had I made a monumental mistake? I loved Mark, or at least the Mark I thought I knew. But this new dynamic, with Doris as a permanent fixture in our home, was something I hadn't signed up for. As I finally drifted off to sleep, my mind swirled with a mixture of confusion, regret, and a touch of foreboding. If this was what the honeymoon phase looked like, what would the rest of our marriage hold? The house might have remained the same, but the home was shattered. And while Doris unpacked her bags, filling our spaces with her imposing presence, I couldn't shake off the feeling that she was also unpacking the fissures that would crack the very foundation of our marriage. The following weeks were a master class in torment, thanks to Doris. With her well-practiced maneuvers of passive aggression and blatant insults, she had turned our home into a battlefield. She seemed to have this magical ability to turn every pleasant moment sour, like a dark cloud that loomed over sunny days. If home is where the heart is, then my heart was currently in a state of siege. Each morning, Doris would wake up early and occupy the kitchen, her domain, as she liked to call it. "I've got 30 years of cooking under my belt, darling." She would often remind me, making it clear that my culinary skills, or lack thereof, according to her, couldn't hold a candle to her experience. "Ella, are you making coffee?" She'd call out from the kitchen, knowing full well that I had been brewing my own coffee every morning for years. "Yes, I am," I'd reply, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "You might want to let someone with more experience handle that. You know, so it's actually drinkable," she'd sneer. This continued with house chores, TV time, and even when I tried to have a peaceful moment in the garden. It was as if Doris had a sixth sense for detecting my comfort and swooping in to destroy it. The worst part? Mark stood by and let it all happen. His inaction spoke volumes. It screamed that he was okay with his mother belittling me in my own home. The resentment inside me grew day by day, fed by his silence and her incessant nagging. "Mark, this can't go on. I cornered him one evening when Doris had gone out to meet some friends. Your mother is making my life miserable, and you're just standing there watching. What do you want me to do, Ella? She's my mom. I can't just kick her out, he said, exasperated. It's not about kicking her out. It's about setting boundaries, Mark. It's about you standing up for your wife. So what? You want me to choose between you and my mother? He retorted, his face turning red. No, I want you to stand up for what's right. I want you to be the partner you promised to be when we got married, I said, my eyes filling with tears. The room was thick with tension, the air filled with words that hung heavy but went unsaid. Mark sighed, looking defeated. I'll talk to her, okay. I'll try to make things better. Try. The word hung in the air, stinging like salt in a fresh wound. That's just it, Mark. I don't need you to try. I need you to do it. Days turned into weeks, and my home started feeling more like a prison. The walls closed in on me, and it wasn't just the walls of the house. It was the walls I built to protect myself, the walls that were now crumbling under the weight of emotional abuse and matrimonial neglect. To the outside world, we must have looked like a picture, perfect family. A devoted wife, a hardworking husband, and a loving mother-in-law. But pictures capture moments, not truths. And the truth was, I was trapped in a life that no longer felt like my own. The home that once represented comfort and sanctuary was now a breeding ground for my anxieties and doubts. I felt like an unwelcome guest in my own life, a sentiment that intensified each day Doris stayed and each day Mark did nothing about it. I had to do something or else risk losing myself entirely in this twisted reality. I knew that one way or another things were about to change. Little did I know how drastic that change would be. If life has taught me anything, it's that it has an uncanny knack for throwing curveballs when you least expect them. The invitation to a party from a longtime friend, Clara, seemed like a lifeline. Maybe this is the chance for Mark and me to remember why we fell in love, I thought, clinging to the tiniest glimmer of hope. As we got ready for the party, for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of excitement. I chose my favorite red dress, the one that had always made me feel confident and elegant, Mark noticed. You look beautiful, he said, his eyes meeting mine with a spark that had been absent for so long. For that fleeting moment, I allowed myself to think that maybe, just maybe, we could turn things around. Doris had decided to stay in for the evening, citing some minor aches and pains. Her go, to excuse whenever she wanted to act like a martyr. Go on, both of you. Have fun, she'd said, although her eyes didn't match the sentiment. The evening started well. The atmosphere was jovial, the conversation was engaging, and I could see the Mark I fell in love with re-emerging. As we mingled with friends, he held my hand with an affection that felt genuine. I'm going to grab us some drinks, he said, squeezing my hand before heading to the makeshift bar in the corner of the room. Time passed, but Mark didn't return. After waiting for what felt like an eternity, concern overshadowed my initial irritation. I began to look for him, going from room to room, making awkward small talk with other guests to mask my growing anxiety. Finally, I found him. Or rather, I found him and her. A one from our circle of friends, Sarah, who had always been overly flirty. They were in an intimate embrace, oblivious to the world around them. My heart sank, and a surge of anger eclipsed my disbelief. What the hell is going on here? I yelled, unable to control my emotions. Mark disentangled himself so abruptly, it was as if he'd been caught stealing. Ella, this isn't what it looks like, he stammered, his face flushed with guilt. What it looks like, Mark, is that you're cheating on your wife in the middle of a party. Sarah slinked out of the room, her eyes avoiding mine, as Mark raised his voice defensively. You've been distant, Ella. Ever since my mom moved in, you've changed. I've changed. Your mother turns our home into a living hell, and now you blame me for your infidelity? We'll talk about this at home. he said, his voice laden with a mix of regret and defiance. The drive home was a symphony of silence, each of us locked in our own world of resentment and disbelief. As we walked into the house, Doris looked up, her eyes narrowing as she sensed the tension. "Well, didn't you two lovebirds have a good time?" she said, her voice a cocktail of sarcasm and folk concern. Before I could respond, a wave of nausea hit me. My vision blurred and the room started spinning. I felt my legs give way beneath me, and the last thing I remember was Mark's voice calling my name in panic before everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a sterile hospital room. The bright lights hurt my eyes, and my body felt like it had been trampled by a herd of elephants. The doctor arrived, her face a mask of professional concern, and delivered the news. I had cancer. As I tried to process the weight of that single word, Mark walked in, his face ashen. "I'm so sorry, Ella," he said, but his apologies no longer mattered. My world had collapsed, and he was one of the main architects of its destruction. The gravity of everything. The disease, Mark's betrayal, and Doris's emotional terrorism suddenly piled up on me like a ton of bricks. In that moment, I realized something had to give. Life had pulled the rug out from under me, and I was tumbling into an abyss, but the time had come to grab onto whatever I could to break the fall. And the first thing I was going to grab was myself. Repect. After being discharged from the hospital, I returned home to a surreal atmosphere. Doris's face was a painting of mixed emotions, part shock, part vindication, as if my diagnosis confirmed her warped notion that I was unworthy. Mark was walking on eggshells around me, juggling guilt over his affair and the weight of my medical condition. The house was no longer a home. It felt like a waiting room for people bound by legal and blood ties, but divided by an emotional chasm too wide to bridge. It was in this setting that Mark chose to hand me the divorce papers, as if putting a formal end to our strained relationship would solve the myriad problems we were drowning in. "Here," he said, his voice trembling. "I think it's for the best." I looked at the papers, then back at him. "For the best? For who, Mark? I can't be the husband you need right now, and you certainly can't be the wife I want," he retorted, as if rehearsed. Doris chimed in from across the room, unable to restrain herself. "You deserve it, you fool." That was it. The breaking point. It was as if that single comment from Doris snapped something inside me. A dam broke, and years of suppressed anger, hurt, and betrayal flooded out. "Enough!" I shouted, startling both of them. "This is my house, my life, and you've both done enough to ruin it. You, Mark, had vows to honor. You, Doris, had boundaries to respect. Neither of you did. You two deserve each other." I grabbed the divorce papers from the table, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and resolve. "You want a divorce, Mark? You'll get it. But let me make one thing clear. You'll walk away with nothing. And you," I turned to Doris, "will have to find a new victim to leech off, because you're not staying another day in my house." Mark looked like he'd been slapped. "Ella, please, can we talk about this?" "There's nothing left to talk about. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Doris began to sob, playing her usual card of emotional manipulation. "How can you kick me out? I have nowhere to go." "That's not my problem anymore, is it? You should have thought of that before you made my life a living hell." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, doctor visits, and deep self-reflection. I was fighting battles on multiple fronts, but for the first time, I felt like I was regaining control. The court ruled in my favor, granting me a divorce settlement that mandated Mark and Doris to pay $500,000 in compensation and move out within a week. They were also to cover all costs for my medical treatment. They pleaded, they begged, but my decision was unyielding. In the end, Doris and Mark left, laden with the consequences of their actions. As for me, I was left with an empty house and a life to rebuild. But sometimes an empty house is a blessing. It gives you the space you need to start anew, to set up the life you truly deserve. It was a painful journey, full of steep climbs and sudden falls. But one thing was for sure. I was no longer willing to be a spectator in my own life. It was time to become the protagonist of my story. A story where villains existed but didn't define the narrative. As for my health, it was a hard-fought battle, but I came out victorious. The cancer went into remission, and I took it as a sign. Life had given me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. From that point on, Mark and Doris became chapters in my past, lessons learned but not worth revisiting. I had moved on, stronger and wiser, with the understanding that sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well. It's reclaiming the life that others tried to take away from you. As Mark and Doris packed their belongings, a solemn atmosphere loomed over the house. Gone were the days of family breakfasts and movie nights. This home was now a battleground where victory and defeat were being sorted. They had 1 week to move out, and each day that ticked by felt like a physical countdown. Not just for their exit, but also for the rebirth of my life. On the final day, as the moving trucks pulled up to the house, I watched them from the living room window. Mark appeared drained, his face showing the toll of everything that had transpired. Doris wore a scowl that seemed almost permanently etched into her features. Mark paused before exiting, as if mustering the courage to say something. "Ella, I'm truly sorry for everything." "You didn't deserve any of this," he mumbled, his eyes avoiding direct contact with mine. "No, I didn't," I replied, my voice steady. "But you both are going to have to live with the choices you made. I hope one day you'll understand the gravity of your actions." Doris chimed in, her tone bitter. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? That money will solve all your problems?" "It's not about money, Doris," I retorted, feeling an immense sense of liberation. "It's about respect, something you've never given me. And now you've lost the respect of the one person you thought would always be on your side, your son." The atmosphere was thick with tension as they left the house. The door closing behind them felt symbolic, like the end of a tumultuous chapter and the beginning of something new. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the silence that filled the rooms, the tranquility that comes with the absence of toxic people. After they left, I walked through the house. It was empty but filled with potential. I entered what used to be their room, took down the curtains Doris had insisted on hanging, and opened the windows wide. Fresh air poured in, filling the space like a cleansing wave. With their exit, my medical treatments continued, but now they were funded by the settlement. Each appointment, each therapy session felt like another step not just towards physical healing, but emotional and mental rebuilding as well. And remarkably, the universe seemed to be on my side this time. After months of grueling treatments and countless prayers, the doctors declared me cancer-free. As I stepped out of the hospital, the sun seemed brighter, the world fuller. I was not the same Ella who had walked down the aisle filled with naive dreams. I was stronger, resilient, forged through trials and tribulations. As for Mark and Doris, I heard through the grapevine that they had moved into a cramped apartment, a stark contrast to the comfortable home they had once shared with me. Their financial troubles were mounting, compounded by the settlement they had to pay. It was not a tale of happiness for them, but then they were architects of their own downfall. Sometimes people wonder if I ever regret how things turned out, if I ever miss the life I had before. To them, I say, there are things far worse than being alone, and living in a toxic environment is one of them. Revenge is often seen as an act of emotional impulse, but sometimes it's a necessary means to an end, a way to reclaim your life and your dignity. Mark and Doris became footnotes in my life story, lessons that taught me the importance of self-respect and the value of standing up for oneself. As I write this chapter from the comfort of my peaceful home, healed both physically and emotionally, I relish in the thought that the best form of revenge is not just success, but the utter and complete reclaiming